The third council brings us this next step. Third council is in Ephesus. I picked it out for you on the map. You notice you've really got to know your Asia Minor to tell these places apart. They're all kind of in the same area of Greek-speaking ancient Christendom. The heresy refuted is Nestorianism. No surprise, it's named after a guy named Nestorius. The key doctrine here is the unity of Christ's person. We read a book from Cyril of Alexandria. Morgan House reads it, right? Johnson doesn't get it anymore, I think. Cyril of Alexandria's book on the unity of Christ. This is his big thing. So Third Council teaches this. Here's our hero for the Third Council, Cyril of Alexandria. Died in 444. That makes it easy to remember. I called Athanasius my hero. I'll get in physical altercations with people who badmouth him sometimes. But Cyril, I'll also defend his character. There's a lot of slander against Athanasius. People hated him a lot and spread crazy rumors about him, like he chopped off people's hands and used them in magical potions and things like that. It's ridiculous slander. I think I can defend Athanasius historically against all those charges. There are also charges against Cyril, like he hired a bunch of thug monks to beat up his theological enemies. Let me say this about his reputation. I love his theology. Yeah. I'm not really sure. I mean, I've weighed the historical evidence, and it kind of seems like Cyril of Alexandria might have been kind of a thug. I don't know what monk meant in the 5th century, but apparently they traveled in gangs and were tough. So anyway, if you find that he was up to some shenanigans, maybe. I mean, maybe I could be belligerently loyal and get him off the hook, but I'll save my energy for Athanasius and just say, I love this guy's Christology. It's awesome. You should read his commentary on John. Cyril insisted on the unity of Christ's person. From him we get this key term, as we talk about it now in English, the hypostatic union. That is the union of two natures in one person, or just hypostasis. We could call it a personal union, but that's a little ambiguous in English. So this is a place where it's actually better to use the technical term when trying to speak precisely about it. Here's what's really going on with Cyril. We get all the way through to a Bible fight. So if you read the Gospels, what do you get? This character, Jesus, gives life to all things. Through him, everything was created. And yet, he's born, and he's a baby. That's weird. How is the life giver all of a sudden someone who seems to receive life and enter into existence as someone who gets born? God is everywhere, but the man Jesus grows, as Luke tells us twice, right? And as we would know just from common sense, that people aren't born full-sized. God is omniscient and knows all, and yet the man Jesus Christ learns. Yeah? It's Gnostic Gospels who make up stories of Jesus being homeschooled because when they sent him to kindergarten and the teacher tried to tell him the Hebrew alphabet, he gave a mystical discourse on how he invented the Hebrew alphabet and told the teacher to drop dead. These Gospels, these pseudo-Gospels actually exist in the early church, and you can see what's going on. They're sort of urban legend literature. They're bizarre literature from Jesus fans who can't quite grasp his humanity, right? But the real Gospels kind of commonsensically let you know, yeah, then he grew up and learned stuff, and then when he was of age, he began his ministry. The Son of God rules in glory, and then here's where it really comes to a point. The man Jesus Christ, you know how his story ends. He suffers and he dies. But how can he die if he's the Son of God and he's eternal? Eternal doesn't just mean he's really old. It means he doesn't die, but he dies. What's going on there? This is not some clever problem that atheists on the internet thought up. This is right there in the Gospels. Well, what you can do is you can kind of sort your gospel story into two different receptacles. Like, oh, here are God statements made about Jesus, and here's Jesus claiming the prerogatives of God and doing things that only God is supposed to do. And then there are human things he does. And so you can kind of sort these two ways. This is actually a good, legitimate move to make. To sort of notice this thing Jesus is doing as divine, and this thing Jesus is doing as human. But if you go too far with that, you can actually start thinking there's the God Jesus and the man Jesus. And they always hang out together. You never see them apart. But they're sort of going through, and God Jesus does one thing, then man Jesus does this other thing. And they never sort of mix what they do because they're two different Jesus. This is actually two Jesus in one. It's a terrible thought. Let me spell it out for you a little bit. Cyril looks at this and says, you know these two different columns? Here's a rule for how to make good Jesus sentences. To make a good orthodox statement about who Jesus is and to get the right Jesus and do justice to what the Bible says of him, it's fine to make these two lists of divine things and human things, but you've got to be able to make sentences that take a subject from one and a predicate from the other, or vice versa. You've got to be able to say, God suffered. Even though God in himself and the divine nature is not subject to being overcome by outside forces and undergoing suffering that overwhelms him, God suffers. This divine one does a human thing. Or you can go the other way. This man, Jesus Christ, rules in glory. Right? If you had known who he was, you would not have crucified the Lord of glory. You got to be able to do a subject from one and a predicate from the other. This is the hypostatic union. The eternal one dies. Doesn't mean there wasn't any God that weekend. It means the one true God actually underwent the only death on the market, human death. Yeah? There's not like there's God death in the closet and he's avoiding it and he opted for human death instead. There's only one kind of death out there, human death, and God goes and gets it. This is called the interchange of properties, or the Latin term is communicatio idiomatum. Don't use that or Taunus will kill you. Although I was in a pizza place one time in Chicago and my table had communicatio idiomatum carved into it. And I thought, that's weird. Does this happen to everybody or is it just me? It's really... I thought maybe it was catching on or something. So here's the therefore, and you got to stick with me on this one. Therefore, according to this Council of Ephesus, Mary is the mother of God. And according to the theology of Cyril of Alexandria, Mary is the mother of God. Now, it's kind of a weird phrase, and if I were to start class with a test and say, true or false, Mary is the mother of God, you could be forgiven, or excused, rather, for saying, no, God doesn't have a mother. God is before all mothers. God, is eternal. He didn't come from somebody. But notice what's going on here. Mary is the mother of God in the sense that Mary is the mother of Jesus, and Jesus is God. Nestorius, so people are actually saying this all over the place, saying, wow, isn't this great? Let's talk about Mary. What do you think about her? I think she's the God-bearer. I think she's Theotokos, the mother of God. Nestorius hears this and comes in and says, that's very imprecise. I think you should speak more carefully theologically. I think you should say she's the mother of Christ, but not of God. Well, it might come from a good instinct, but notice what's going on there. You're dividing Jesus and saying, this Jesus has a God part and a man part, and the man part can get born of a woman, but there's no way God can get born of a woman. So often people who get overly precise with other people's theology end up lapsing into a heresy of their own. It's often when someone moves to town and says, I declare myself hammer of the heretics. It's on my business card. I will destroy them. Within 6 months, they're a heretic themselves because they've picked a heresy they hate the most and gone after it. Or they've just been overly precise in the things of God. I love precision. I want to make true statements and not make false statements. But Mary is the mother of God is actually the right answer, and to deny it runs afoul of this commitment to the unity of Christ. Everybody get that? Now, the way the phrase mother of God is used all down through church history is it's often used in churches that have made too much of the identity and the status and the importance of Mary. And so when someone says Mary is the mother of God and the mediatrix of all graces and the queen of the universe and stuff like that, then you go, whoa. The way that went into that overall doctrinal complex is something with which I disagree. But the phrase mother of God as a statement about the unity of Christ is actually fine. And I sort of like that it bugs me a little bit. Probably it bugs me a little bit because I'm so radically Protestant. But I think, yeah, mother of God, that makes me feel funny. But that's because the incarnation makes me feel funny. And if you're thinking good thoughts about Mary, you're thinking good thoughts about the incarnate Christ, right? You're not thinking about her as setting up shop on her own somewhere saying, one day I had a baby and then there was God, then he made the world. It's not that kind of nonsense. It's an affirmation of the unity of the incarnation. Okay, much more could be said, but let me show you some crazy Nestorian stuff. This is Rembrandt's painting of the raising of Lazarus, a story told only in John's Gospel. This story gives you those two different things that Jesus does really clearly. So when Jesus shows up, Mary and Martha say, Lord, if you had been here. I mean, if you think about that, it's a weird thing to say to God incarnate. He's everywhere. Well, he wasn't in Bethany at the appropriate time, right? And when he shows up, he says, where is Lazarus? Now, he could be thinking, being omniscient, I know where Lazarus is, but I will pretend and ask. Or he could actually wonder where Lazarus is, which is kind of a straightforward way to read it. Then he wept, and that may not seem like an undivine thing to you, because we may want to think about God as feeling our pain and being moved by our infirmities, and we can think that way. But actually to look at God being troubled in his soul by human suffering, you may think you want God to cry with you, but if you think about it for a minute, you have to say, anything God does infinitely and eternally. So if he's deeply troubled in his spirit, that times infinity, that's a problem. Like somewhere in the divine life, you got to put up some firewalls and say, isn't God mainly blessed and glorious and almighty? Now there could be room in the divine life for compassion, but it can't be this infinite compassion that swamps the other divine attributes. And so this strong verb used here where Jesus weeps actually has to be handled well theologically. You cannot deny that Jesus wept, or that Jesus is God, or that this is one of the shortest verses in the English Bible. But anyway. Then he does this really divine thing, which is to say, Lazarus, come forth. Now, anyone can talk to dead bodies anytime they want to, but if they obey you, that's something special going on there, right? And Lazarus does come forth. So there are divine things and human things going on. I know how I read this as someone with Orthodox Christology. How would a Nestorian approach this? Well, roughly like this. I don't want to make fun of real Jesus pictures, so I got a comic book one. A Nestorian view of this would have the human nature of Jesus saying human things. I am hungry. But the divine nature would say divine things like, I am the bread of life. Would he use different voices? I'm not going to go there. Notice there's a dividing line here. You've actually got a division within the unity of Jesus Christ such that the human nature is saying and doing things proper to itself, and the divine nature is saying and doing things proper to itself. Let me just flag the big problem I made there. I have natures, and I personified them. I started talking about them as agents. The divine nature does this. The divine nature says this. Natures don't do anything. Persons do things. The one person, Jesus Christ, may do things from a divine nature and do things from a human nature. And he can, because unlike you and me, he's got two natures. Right? And I'm not going to, this is where some of the mystery is, I'm not going to explain to you a model of exactly how one person moves through two natures. Right? But I am going to tell you the evidence indicates this must be what happened. The one person, the Son of God, did things divinely and did things humanly. But if you go one step and say, the divine nature did this and the human nature did that, you're in Jesus zone. Here's a Nestorian Jesus scope. You're looking at one Jesus, but if you could look inside, you'd see the two Jesus. The human one would say, I'll ask where Lazarus is buried since I'm human and I don't know. And the divine Jesus says, good plan, then I'll raise him from the dead since I can. These guys always stick together, and outwardly speaking, they seem to be one Jesus. But there are two different persons going on in there. Now, Nestorius never actually said, doctrine, there are two persons in Jesus. It doesn't even make sense. If you got the first two councils right, it's hard to even understand how you can make that kind of mistake. What Nestorius did was talked in a way and anathematized other ways of talking that made it inevitable that you find two different, I've got to use a little technical terminology here, two different prosopons or appearances of a person going on within one overall comprehensive prosopon. So there's a human-natured one and a divine-natured one inside the one. So you end up with three natures or something, or three persons or something like that. It's all a bit of a mess. And remember, it started with a desire to be tidy doctrinally. Yeah, but it didn't work out. I'll come back to that in a second when I finish up with Chalcedon. Chalcedon, the year 451, such a swell council that for shorthand, people won't say, I believe in the Christology of Nicaea, Constantinople I, Ephesus, and Chalcedon. They'll just say Chalcedon, because it presupposes the ones before it and issued a nice, concise doctrinal statement, which is printed in your Creeds book, edited by Leith. It's printed in the back of Grudem. It's just a swell piece of classic work. No reason not to memorize it, except life is short and you're memorizing other things. The year is 451. The heresy refuted is Eutychianism, named after Eutyches. And the key doctrine is the two natures of Christ. It's asserting the two natures of Christ over against the misunderstanding of Eutyches, which goes something like this. Here's this version of theology that arises here. Before the incarnation, you have godhood and you have manhood, two natures. God is yellow, man is blue. They come together at the incarnation, and yellow and blue make green. You've done the color mixing. So then, after the incarnation, You don't have two natures anymore. You had the divine nature and the human nature, but now that they're joined, you have this one new nature. It's not godhood, it's not manhood, it's God-manhood. Cool. It's not yellow, it's not blue, it's green. Well, you kind of feel some sympathy here because that kind of makes a little bit of sense, but it leads to unacceptable results. Cyril of Alexandria, who died in 444, had this motto, one incarnate nature after the union. It may be possible to interpret one incarnate nature after the union in an orthodox sense, but his followers, down around the time of the Council of Chalcedon, were taking it way too far to really suggest this kind of morphing or mingling or conglomerating of the two natures, such that the two natures were no longer present. There was a new third nature. Here's some of the problems. Well, first let me give you the right answer, and then I'll show you some more of the problems with Eutychianism. Here's the right Jesus. Before the incarnation, there's just the divine nature. Notice there's not the human nature of Jesus Christ before the incarnation. There's human nature. It's running around sinning and stuff, right, in each of its instantiations. But there's not a human nature of Jesus Christ hanging out before the incarnation going, can't wait to be joined with God. It just doesn't exist, right? The human nature of Jesus Christ is a creature. It comes into existence when the Son of God brings his divine nature all the way into the human story and adds to himself manhood, right? So you never get yellow and blue making green, partly because you never had blue hanging around waiting to get joined to the yellow in the first place. That's the first error to avoid. But the other one is they don't join in such a way that they merge or mingle or lose themselves in a new third thing, right? Nazianzus' old motto for this works really well. What he was, he remained. What he was not, he became. This is also why it's legitimate to say that God did not change when the Son became incarnate. Right? He added something to himself, but he did not cease to be one thing and turn into another thing. When the word became flesh, it's not your everyday kind of becoming. I am becoming an old man. How? By ceasing to be a young man. Every day I get a little less of a young man and I change from youth into age. I leave behind one thing in order to enter into another thing. That's not what happened when the Word became flesh. The Word didn't quit being the Word of God to add to itself flesh or human nature. Does that make sense? Yellow and blue don't make green. Just write that down. Anyway, this is hypostatic union. So here's the bad part of Eutychianism. It's easy to think, oh, they become green, but in fact, they wouldn't become green. Even if Eutychianism were true and the two natures mingled into one, yellow and blue wouldn't make green, because how big is the human nature? About yay big. How big is the divine nature? Infinite big. What happens if you mix a little bit of blue into an infinite amount of yellow? It's yellow. Right? I mean, there may be a few parts per billion zillion of blue in there somewhere, but no one's going to look at it and say, well, that is green. Right? The divine nature is just going to absorb and overwhelm the human nature. You actually have to keep them distinct in the incarnation to save the humanity of Christ. Because if you just take the humanity of Christ and throw it into the divine nature of Christ, it's gone. It blurps like this. The dreaded Christological blurp. Yeah, it's gone. You don't get it back. If I go down and throw a bottle of ink in the ocean, I do not turn the ocean gray. It's a stupid thing. I shouldn't throw a bottle of ink in the ocean. It's pollution in some form. But it's not like the news comes on in the morning and say, the Pacific Ocean has turned gray. Someone must have thrown a little bit of ink into it. No, it's really, really big. Don't throw ink in the ocean. I'm just saying. It's just an illustration. One person has called Eutychianism the religious withering of humanity. Because it's not that we're worried we're going to turn God green. It's we're worried that the humanity is really going to not be there functionally at all. Oh, here's just another metaphor for you. Look, I lit a candle. I held it up to the sun. Oh, is the candle still burning? I cannot tell. And my eyes hurt. So at best you could say the human nature of Christ is there, but utterly ineffective. Ineffective even for our salvation. Right? I mean, what role is it playing in our salvation? I don't know. It's sunshine. Blow out your stupid candle. So it's human nature in there, but who cares? Chalcedonian definition, I got to wrap this up, so I'll leave it to you guys to look at. It's in the Creed's book. It's in the Grudem book. The key thing here is this set of negative adjectives. No confusion, no change, no division, no separation. The This is the one Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of God, acknowledged to be in two natures. Not just from two natures into one new nature, but in two natures in an ongoing way. But he's not, you don't go so much in the direction of two natures that you lose the one person. You go so much in the direction of the one person that you lose the two natures. There's two of something in Jesus, there's one of something in Jesus. It's that easy. Make up whatever word you want for it. Make up dignified words. But. Question, how are the two natures unified? Here are some possible answers. Well, these two natures, they become one new nature. The human being absorbed into the divine. No, that's a bad answer. And that would be a natural union of the two natures. If the two natures had a natural union, that's the Eutychian answer. You don't want that. That's the green one. Well, here's another option. Well, these two natures, divine and human, they choose to remain together, and the human one obeys the divine nature. Well, now I'm talking about natures as agents, and now I have what kind of a union? It's really an interpersonal union in the incarnation. Well, that wouldn't work, and we can conveniently label that Nestorianism. But I hope you're seeing why these don't work, and then we stamp them with a little label, right? Once you got these heresy stamps, you don't actually want to be at a party and say, when someone says something, well, I kind of think Jesus blah, 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 and you say, Nestorianism! Right? Like, that's not what you want to do. They can be useful placeholders to help you say, yes, that is a marker of a particular error that I remember and can describe if I think hard. Well, let's try another answer. It's not Eutychian, it's not Nestorian. What about they are joined in one person? One hypostasis is the Greek term here. How are they joined? Without confusion, change, division, or separation. Joined, two natures joined in a person. Well, if the natures are joined in a person, what you've got is a hypostatic union. Not a natural union, not an interpersonal union, but a personal union. Hypostatic. That's the right answer. Yay, ding, 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 ding. The Orthodox Christology. You got it. Whoops, I think that's actually where I'm going to stop. That's the Christological box. Yeah, there he is. So you know the errors to avoid. Whoop. Avoid Eutychianism, Nestorianism, Arianism, and Apollinarianism. I could actually say one thing here. I've got it a little bit oblong. I don't have it as a circle, partly because as I described Nestorianism and Monophysitism, or Eutychianism rather, you might have thought, could you say more about why Nestorianism's wrong? Because I kind of think it, right? I mean, I hope I presented it in a stark enough form that you could see why it's a problem to confess those things of Christ. But if we're honest with ourselves, we say, let's say that this balance between the one person and the two natures is a really precarious balance. Let's say it's a single point that I have to try to occupy conceptually. Now, I'm not planning on falling off of this, but if I did, would I rather fall off in the Nestorian direction or the Eutychian direction? You can kind of actually pick which way you kind of tend. You can pick that partly just for better knowledge of where you are theologically, to know what dangers to avoid. It's actually worth doing. And I could even look at denominations or major Christian traditions down through the 2,000 years and say, which way one of them leans. So, in general, Catholicism and the Reformed tend toward Nestorianism. Roman Catholics and Calvinists have that in common. They're not Nestorians, but they lean that way. They're sure not going to fall off on the Eutychian side. Most forms of Eastern Orthodoxy and Lutherans tend the other way. If they're going to fall off, they're going to lean towards the Eutychian direction. They're not Eutychians, but they're more like that. This shows up in lots of things about what they say about Christ, what they say about the Lord's Supper, lots of things that they think. So it's actually legitimate to have a little bit of wiggle room there. Not to pick your favorite heresy and make a beeline for it, but actually just to acknowledge that, yeah, there's a little bit of play there, and as you think through some details of your Christology, if you feel yourself tending in a really strong emphasis on the two distinct natures, just keep a little note card in your pocket that says, don't be Nestorian. Oh, right, yeah. Like two natures, but don't be Nestorian. On the other hand, Arianism and Apollinarianism, like Jesus not being fully God or not being fully man, those you shouldn't tilt toward. You should just absolutely, utterly avoid those, right? You say well, I'm a Christian, but I'm more like a Jesus is only God sort of a Christian. That's just wrong, and there's really almost no wiggle room in there. You can more judge yourself by, am I adequately thinking the divinity of Christ? Am I adequately thinking the humanity of Christ? All right, that is the doctrine of the person of Jesus Christ.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.